Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. Today is the fifth year anniversary of my hosting a show on Saga 960, which is kind of fun. And it started in 2019 during a federal election campaign when the radio station came to me and said that they wanted to have someone that was not right-wing because they had a bunch of right-wing announcers and hosts on their show, and they wanted someone that was more left-wing. I wasn't very left. I was more centrist, but someone a little bit more progressive. And so 5 years of interviewing over 2,500 guests. And I've had the pleasure of having Dennis Mills, a former parliamentarian, a former member of parliament, a former executive in business in the Chairman Mills, as well as Magna and several other experiences on my show before. But this past week, he posted a really interesting post about Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister. Last week, we had a couple of shows that suggested that Justin Trudeau's time as Prime Minister was coming to an end. The Liberal Party and their government was coming to an end. And Dennis had a different point of view that he published in a really interesting post in regards to who was fighting for Canada. So I thought it would be really important to have Dennis Mills on to talk about his point of view about what's going on in Canadian politics right now. And Dennis, it's an honor to have you again, and it's an honor to have you as my fifth year anniversary show.
Well, Brian, I'm so excited to be here. And as I said to you another time, whenever I've done your show, I get feedback and comments from not just people close to me, but I get comments from people sometimes in different parts of the world. So I think your YouTube blast or whatever you're doing there is really working, because it's got your show has a truly global reach. And I'm excited to be on your fifth anniversary today, because for me personally, I consider this one of the most important moments to talk about what I believe in terms of what's going on in the political landscape today. And you touched upon my post that I put up on Facebook a couple of days ago.
Speak a little closer to the microphone, good sir.
Can I get a little closer?
That's better.
Am I a little better now?
Yep.
Okay, there you go. Thanks, Brian. So when you're a senior like me, when you're close to 80 years old, you have a little more time to listen to CPAC, and you know, when you've spent 20 years on Parliament Hill, you can't just expunge that experience from your thought process. And this week, I watched the Bloc Quebecois really put the ultimatums to Justin Trudeau. Justin Trudeau, you are going to do two things, or otherwise we are going to put you out of business. And the first thing, of course, was he talked about supply management, which the government of Canada already believes in. And he talked about, of course, increasing the Quebec pension system. And Brian, what was unique about his remarks this time, because the NDP has vanished, is the fact that he said that if you do not support these private members' bills, we are going to have a vote of non-confidence, and we are going to the people. Now, we already know that Pierre Poilievre talks about the carbon tax election and, you know, inflation, when inflation's coming down, and interest rates, and their interest rates are coming down. So he focuses on carbon tax. But Brian, the real issue here is who speaks for Canada. And out of the blue, we've got a situation where the Bloc, coming off their victory in Montreal, in the Salimar, the riding, they have now decided that they are the balance of power in the House of Commons, the nation's boardroom. And they have said quite clearly in the last 72 hours, we want these things, and ultimately we want to be our own nation, the nation of Quebec. And so I believe that Justin Trudeau has been handed the theme, the cause for the next election. And that is one sentence: who speaks for Canada? Now, we know that the Bloc doesn't speak for Canada, and they have declared so. And we don't know where Singh is, and it doesn't really matter, because he'll never form a national government. Now, the question is to Pierre Poilievre, because this week in the House of Commons in question period, he used the words the Quebec nation. I watched him use it 3 times, the Quebec nation. So Pierre, do you speak for Canada or do you just speak for parts of Canada? And so I believe that the next election, like the 1980 election, Pierre Trudeau's message in the 1980 election was who speaks for Canada? And that is what we're going to have, in my judgment, in my gut feeling. That's going to be the theme of the election that I think is going to be on us sooner rather than later.
So you think that what, Justin Trudeau is going to be defeated by the Bloc Quebecois in a non-confidence vote, and then the election is going to be on this topic?
Well, we already know that Pierre Poilievre wants an election. He's up
his 20% in the polls.
He's up 20%. He's already declared that he wants an election. So we know where that vote is. Well, if the Bloc comes along with their non-confidence vote, how can Pierre Poilievre not support the Bloc? Okay, he's cornered. And so unless Pierre Poilievre, and this would be a magical moment that I would welcome, unless Pierre Poilievre, with his 20-point advantage, has the guts, and he should have the guts, to say, I speak for Canada, and I'm going to support Prime Minister Trudeau's position that we are not going to be dictated to by the Bloc.
Why do you think this issue is so critically important? Why do you think that the Bloc has changed the trajectory of Justin Trudeau's potential prime ministership?
Well, I think that the Bloc is obviously, after their victory in Montreal, La Salle-Mar, the riding of La Salle-Mar, which had been sort of a liberal bastion for many, many years, including it was the riding of Paul Martin. I believe that the Bloc now senses a moment where they can maybe double or even double their seats. They have 33 seats in Quebec right now. And if all of a sudden they sent back to Ottawa 60, 70 seats, they would really be the official opposition if Pierre Poilievre became the government. Now, Canadians have to decide, do they have enough confidence that Pierre Poilievre can manage and handle that separatist thrust that is coming out of Quebec right now?
You know, a few years ago, the Parti Québécois, the Bloc Quebecois, separatism in Quebec seems dead. Why is it in its ascendancy again?
I don't know the answer to that, Brian. And I've had a couple of people that have said to me, since I posted those remarks on Facebook, they say separatism is not an issue. Well, it may not be an issue this very hour, but who would have thought 2 weeks ago that the Bloc Quebecois would have won? And remember now, remind ourselves that the Bloc Quebecois want a Quebec nation. Who would have thought they ever would have won a seat in Montreal? Who would have ever thought they could have taken? But they did, okay? And so I think we're being terribly naive if we just dismiss, oh, there will never be a campaign again for separation. We already know that the Premier of Quebec has said that there's going to be a referendum. The Bloc Québécois is not going to vote against a referendum. So there seems to be an aligning of the stars for a pathway, for a referendum, and then ultimately a sort of a plan, a pathway for separation. I believe that it's a lot closer than a lot of us really think.
We're chatting with Dennis Mills, a former parliamentarian. Did you say you spent 20 years on Parliament Hill, sir?
20 years I spent, 16 of them elected and 4 in the office of Pierre Elliott Trudeau, a man that I consider to be one of our best prime ministers.
So you've got the experience, you've got the knowledge. Who thinks that things changed for Justin Trudeau this past week because of the Bloc Quebecois position? We're going to take a break for some messages.
By the way, Brian, I don't think things have changed in the last 2 weeks for Justin Trudeau. I feel the sort of the lack of interest in Justin Trudeau. But I believe that Canadians, when they really have their pedal to the metal, when it comes to a choice between a united Canada or a pathway to separation with the Bloc, I think they will say who can best speak for Canada. And that's where I think that Justin Trudeau could have miraculously received a reprieve that nobody would have thought 10 days ago.
We're going to take a break for some messages and come back with Dennis Mills in just 2 minutes talking about will Justin Trudeau get presented a reprieve, as he argues. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I'm chatting tonight with Dennis Mills. He spent 20 years on Parliament Hill, 16 years as a member of Parliament, 4 years working for Pierre Elliott Trudeau, former Prime Minister, and the father of our current Prime Minister. And he's also been a very involved Liberal both before and after that time, and a very involved business executive and someone who knows a lot about communications and about branding and about politics. Someone who I respect immensely in the business community and in the political world. Dennis, last week I've had several different people on my show talking about how Justin Trudeau's days are numbered, and they should be numbered, and that he should voluntarily leave. I had a gentleman, an author on, who wrote a book about Justin Trudeau, who said that he's way too confident, overconfident, and he can't see the writing on the wall, and he won't think that anyone else can succeed him. I had some Liberal and conservative politicians and political activists on who said that he's got to go and he's got to resign. It's got to let someone else take it. Otherwise, it's going to be a disaster comparable to Brian Mulroney, Kim Campbell, and going down to 2 seats, or Kathleen Wynne going down to a massive failure, or Michael Ignatieff going down to a huge failure. You've changed things with your post this week. This "Who Fights for Canada" is a theme that I haven't seen or heard from Justin Trudeau. If you were advising Justin Trudeau today, what would you tell him to do? How would you change the current communications agenda?
First of all, you know that, and all the things that you've said about all those people you've talked to, and this Stephen Mahar, who's I consider to be a very insightful journalist in the zone today. First of all, you have to know a little something about Justin. Justin has a proclivity to not really listen to some of the elders that have had the experience, the joy, the privilege of working with people like his father and others like his father, Jean Chrétien. There's a little bit of a disconnect. And so, but if Justin were on your show right now, or if I was talking to him rather than you, I would say to him, Justin, you better buckle up and you better focus on one thing, and you have to decide whether or not you want to do this, because it's going to be a very difficult task when you're 20% in the polls, okay, and you've got the opposition, right around your neck. You have to walk away from that and say, here's going to be the theme of my campaign, and you've got to stay on that. It's the election. This is not about Justin Trudeau. This is about the people of Canada. The people of Canada have to make a choice here. Who speaks for Canada? And that has to be his focus. Don't get sidetracked by the carbon tax. It's not going to be a carbon tax election. Now, in the last 72 hours that we have the Bloc Quebecois saying, here's the way it's going to be in this country, and especially for Quebec, we want to separate. That becomes the issue. It is almost mysteriously and magically overtaken all other issues. I mean, don't get distracted by, when Pierre, and I've never had a bad word with Pierre Poilievre, but when he talks about inflation, inflation's coming down. When he talks about interest rates, they're coming down. And I realize that there's a lot of economic pain. We've got a catastrophic situation in housing in our country. And I totally know that, and I support that. But right now, Canadians have to, for their own sake, because a divided Canada is going to create an economic mess that is beyond our imaginations right now. This is going to affect our dollar. It's going to affect our trading practices. It's going to affect it. It's like going through a divorce in a marriage. What happens economically when you go through a divorce or a separation?
It's a disaster.
Chaos.
I can tell you about that.
Well, it's pain. And I'm telling you right now, this is the opportunity for Justin Trudeau to now stand up and say this. And by the way, he shouldn't wait to be defeated. He should go into the House of Commons, or he should go to the Governor General and say, I want an election. That's what I'd be telling him to do.
Take us back to 1980. You said 1980 had some analogies to this situation, and Pierre Trudeau's election in 1980. Remind us of what was happening at the time and what the communication was from the Prime Minister at the time.
Well, in 1980, Brian, the Prime Minister, first of all, as you know, in 79, Joe Clark became the Prime Minister of Canada. And actually, Pierre Trudeau had resigned, okay, from as the leader. He was defeated by Joe Clark, and Pierre Trudeau was the leader of the opposition, but he resigned as leader of the party. And then there was an election call, and they asked Pierre Trudeau to come back. And the reason they asked him to come back is because Joe Clark, theme of his campaign, it was the community of communities. It was a massive decentralization of the national government. That was the theme of the Conservative campaign. Decentralize the strong national government and give the provinces much more power, weaken the national government. And Pierre Trudeau came back, and the theme of the campaign in 1980 was who speaks for Canada? And Pierre Trudeau won a majority government. And Canadians, when Canadians, fast forward, Brian, when Brian Mulroney became the Prime Minister, one of his central issues after his first term was the Meech Lake Accord. And the Meech Lake Accord was a plan to really decentralize and give a lot more power to the provinces. In other words, weaken the national government. And I ran in that campaign. I ran in that campaign because philosophically, I believe in a strong national government. And I ran in a riding in downtown Toronto, the Danforth area, that had been NDP for 22 years. I didn't really think I was going to win, but I wanted to be on record that I think it's really important that we speak up if we believe in a strong national government. And do you know that 20% of the people in that riding that traditionally voted NDP voted for me, and I won, even though Mulroney still won the election. I was 88, I was elected in opposition. And that is my experience, that when it comes to whether we have a strong national government or a decentralized national government, Canadians always vote for the person that they believe is going to maintain a strong national government. And that is the context that I see here today.
Have attitudes changed? If I go to Alberta, there's people talking about Western alienation and Western separation and Alberta separation. And you certainly have a premier in Alberta and Saskatchewan that have been voicing those kinds of concerns. Do we have a different perspective in Canada today that is different than you've described in 1980 or 1988?
Well, that's an excellent point you've raised, because at that time in 1980, and after that election, I was invited to come and work in the Prime Minister's office and work for the cabinet committee responsible for government communications. And Western alienation at that time was alive and well. But what we discovered, Brian, and I think we've got the same issue today, a lot of people in Western Canada and a lot of people right across the country had no idea of the programs and services that the government of Canada supplied, or things that they did in their communities out there. And that's when we came along with the Canada word mark that Canada with the flag over the A, that identified all of the services and programs that the government was putting into Western Canada. I'll give you a very specific one that you could relate to. Like Government of Canada spent $2 billion on rail cars to move grain, and we put the Canada word mark on the side of those rail cars because Western Canada forgot that all of that funding was done by the national government that had the strength, the capacity to make that decision. A weak national government wouldn't have been able to do that. I believe this current government and its communication system really needs reviewing, because I think we're in the same situation now. Canadians, there are flaws with this government. We're not going to debate. And there's pain out there. But I still don't believe we're doing enough to communicate what the government of Canada's services are.
Do you really think that we are at the risk of Canada, of separation? Honestly.
Yes, I do. I honestly believe that, because I've heard from people that have told me, I would never, ever betray these people, that they would, in the next referendum, would be on the opposite side of where I am. In other words, there's a lot more Quebecers that are feeling the Quebec nation sort of spirit. And I will tell you, it's a terrible thing, and people are sometimes brash. I've heard people say, let them go, let them go. But they don't have an idea about what Quebec contributes to the nation, a unified Canada. What kind of chaos would that provide just in terms of our NATO commitment, our global commitments, if everybody around the world saw that we were a divided country? So I really believe it's a serious issue, and I really believe that it should be the only. If Justin Trudeau runs on any other issue, then he might as well leave, because he won't win on any other issue. He's only got one shot, because Canadians only care, in my mind, in spite of all the pain and in spite of all the problems, and we could name them the length of our arm, the ultimate issue is a unified Canada. And you know who did this better than anyone was Jean Chrétien. And when I walk down the streets right now, if I talk to people, they invariably always say, how's Jean doing? Is he okay? He still has massive popularity today, because they always saw Jean Chrétien as Vive la Canada.
Has Pierre Poilievre been able to accomplish anything in popularity in Quebec?
Well, it didn't happen in Montreal 2 weeks ago. I mean, I'm not saying that he doesn't have zones in Quebec where he's got some strength, but I don't like his language in the House of Commons last week, where he used specifically the words the Quebec nation, not Quebec, not the province of Quebec, the Quebec nation. Come on, Brian, that's not smart.
We're going to take a break.
And I've got nothing. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I've got nothing against Pierre Poilievre, but I think that using words like Quebec nation, those aren't the words of the Prime Minister of Canada.
We're going to take a break for some messages and come back with Dennis Mills, talking about the future of Canada, the future of the Liberal Party, the future of Justin Trudeau, and whether things have changed with the Bloc Quebecois now having the balance of power in Parliament and demanding that the Liberal government do certain things. Otherwise, they will defeat the government in a non-confidence motion and trigger an election. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes with former parliamentarian and great guy, Dennis Mills. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. My guest tonight is Dennis Mills. He spent 20 years on Parliament Hill, 4 years in the office of Pierre Elliott Trudeau, former Prime Minister of Canada, 16 years as a member of Parliament. I had occasion to campaign door to door with Dennis Mills, and the guy, I've never met someone at the door better than Dennis Mills. in what he's admitted was a riding that was challenging for a Liberal to win, and he won it on numerous occasions. And I've had occasion to call upon him to talk about some very challenging and difficult to understand issues. And as a member of Parliament, he rose in question period and challenged people in that regard. And I thought he did an incredibly good job. So a very smart guy, a very capable guy, a very street smart retail politician, and I think a communications expert, both from a political standpoint as well as in business. So it's a real honor to be chatting with you tonight, Dennis. Let me take a step back, if I could, for a second. I've interviewed numerous different people about Brexit and about the last election in the UK. And what they've said is that Brexit was clearly a mistake. Nothing that was promised by the people that wanted the separation from the EU came true. In fact, it was far worse than a lot of the people that were on the Remain side suggested, and that it damaged the economy in the UK dramatically. That said, they said there's no appetite to reverse Brexit because, and it's almost a nationalistic, racist kind of attitude. It's even if it's not good for the economy, we still don't want to raise it and have that fight. And it was very close vote. The referendum in Quebec on remaining in Canada was, what was it, 50.1 to 49.9 or something like that. It was, unbelievably close. People argued that it was bad for the economy, and I think people recognized that it would be bad for the economy, but still it was incredibly close. And still today, the Bloc Quebecois and the Parti Quebecois have got huge amount of support. Do people care about the economic impact of Quebec separation, or do they just want to be masters of their own house and have this nationalistic, and at times, people talked about it almost being racial, which is terrible to say, but it was this attitude in the UK of, I just don't want to be told by people in Brussels what to do. Do people in Quebec just not want to be told by people in Ottawa what to do?
Well, the people in Ottawa, first of all, I don't know the answer to that very profound point you just made, but I have to believe that we're at a crossroads here, because I think you may have touched on what I think I'm leaning to, that there may be a mood that's moving. It's almost like somebody being on a slow drip bag. This sort of separation, it's just coming at us ever so slowly. And then the next thing you know, we have a referendum, and the next thing you know, we've lost. And then the next thing you know, we've got people negotiating. And that's what I'm afraid of. But about telling people what to do, the unique thing about the House of Commons is that there are close to 90 seats in the House of Commons that are from Quebec. So the people that are elected from the province of Quebec to represent them in Ottawa have a very direct voice in the nation's boardroom. And my concern as to why this election is going to be about this crossroads, do we want a united Canada or a pathway to separation? Because I think the Bloc is setting itself up to be the official opposition. And if they are the official opposition, that is going to make for a very, very difficult place to manage the affairs of the whole country. We're going to be more divisive than we are today.
The Liberal Party seems to have lost, almost all support in the West. It is today a party of, urban and suburban Canada. It has, up until the by-election of a week ago, held on to many seats in the Montreal Island area, downtown and suburban Toronto, and Vancouver. Can it be the voice for Canada, for national interests, if it's only sort of urban and suburban Canada in 2 or 3 of the major cities? And the counter to that is that the Conservative Party seems to control Western Canada and rural Canada. So you think that Trudeau speaks or can speak for Canada, but can it if it's only urban and suburban in 2 or 3 major cities?
Well, first of all, you've summarized it beautifully, but I would say this, that the issue is not a riding issue. It's a national issue. And I don't know the result of this election, who speaks for Canada. Maybe the rest of Canada is going to go back to their own specific, they're going to shrug aside the who speaks for Canada and not factor it into their thought process. And if that's the case, then fine, so be it. Canadians have spoken. But I believe it's the leader's ability, a duty rather, the Prime Minister's duty to put it on the table so that there's absolute clarity to what the main issue is in the next election campaign. You can't sort of pretend it doesn't exist, because you know it's coming. Anybody that's had any political experience can feel it. Okay, and so if Canadians decide we're going to give this whole show to Pierre Poilievre and the Conservative Party to manage, so be it. But make sure that they see what the choices are, because Pierre Poilievre is going to be asked, what do you mean, Pierre, by Quebec nation? What does that mean? And Canadians are going to have to satisfy themselves that they feel comfortable with his vision. Not his vision on carbon tax, not his vision on housing or inflation or the CBC or whatever it is. I think that national unity supersedes all of these other issues. And if Canadian says, Dennis, you're nuts, you're crazy, we don't care about national unity, we're just going to give it all to Pierre and the Bloc, well, then so be it. But at least the Liberal Party has done its duty, because traditionally it has been the party of national unity.
Now, remind me of the history. My memory is that Joe Clark's government fell because of a budget, and there was something that John Crombie, who I think was the finance minister at the time, presented in the budget that was the issue. How did that change from whatever that issue was? I can't even remember what it was now, to an election that was about national unity?
Well, you're precise, very precise, that it was John Crombie, who was the then Minister of Finance, and there was an 18-cent a gallon tax on gasoline. And that
sounds like a carbon tax.
That was the trigger. That was the trigger. And Joe being short on members, that was the trigger that brought down the Joe Clark government. But the deeper philosophical frustration with Joe, who, by the way, I think is one of the finest human beings I've ever worked with, met on Parliament Hill, Prime Minister Clark. I've witnessed, watched, and I just think he's one fine human being. But his vision, and we can agree and disagree on visions, of a more decentralized national government, was the opposite of Pierre Trudeau's. And so when Pierre Trudeau was brought back in as leader of the Liberal Party, he made that in 1980 the central thrust. But it was the 18-cent a gallon tax that really brought the government down. It was a non-confidence vote.
Some people think that what Trudeau did when he was reelected are some of the most important things that he did in his whole prime ministership, including the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and bringing back the Canadian Constitution. And so, that last term was very impactful on Canada. Is that still something that Justin Trudeau could have in front of him?
Well, there are a number of policy elements within the government of Canada right now that we really need to get our head around as Canadians. Like, I consider two issues that we're not even talking about in a serious way. And one of them is comprehensive tax reform. I don't have to tell you, you being a senior business finance gentleman.
Was he the guy that was talking about a flat tax like decades ago?
It's called a single tax system, because you point to me even a tax lawyer or a tax accountant that understands the Income Tax Act today. They might understand a little piece of it and give advice. And by the way, the biggest opponents to comprehensive tax reform in this country are the men and women, lawyers and accountants, who make all their fancy livings off defending the current complex, inefficient, unfair system. Okay, so number one, we've got to have a leader that has the guts to take on comprehensive tax reform.
Dennis, I'm told that there's more people working for the CRA than National Defense.
That's a fact. Yeah, that's a fact. Yeah, I know but so that's issue number one. But you know what's even bigger than comprehensive tax reform, and we're not even talking about it? Our water. Nobody's talking about our water. Now, God forbid should Trump ever get elected. But Trump has already stated that if he becomes the president of the United States, he's already said, we're going to take a look at Canada's water because there's no way I'm going to let California go dry. Now, it's not just California. It's also the water. 60% of our fresh water, few Canadians know this, 60% of our fresh water flows north and goes into James Bay, which is the ocean. It's salt water. And there have been massive studies done on damming up the southern end of Georgia, of the basin up there in James Bay, and pumping that water back in through to the Great Lakes and through the Chicago diversion to put water into the Midwest. I'm telling you, Brian, Canadians have to get their head around water. It is a huge, huge national issue. Nobody's talking about it. So I mean, if I were Justin Trudeau, national unity, water, and comprehensive tax reform. Because tax reform affects everything. It affects the food, the housing. Did you know in the province of Ontario right now that when you go to buy a house, that 30% of the cost of a house you buy goes to taxes for the municipality, for the province, and the federal government? That's insane.
It is insane. I've done shows on that. And I do think that Justin Trudeau, you know, when was it, a year and a month ago, when he said that housing is not a federal government priority, was wrong. And I think he's changed that, even though he
totally
hasn't
wrong
credit for that. But I do think that the majority of the problem in housing is municipal related and provincial, because the municipalities are part of the province. I don't think it is a federal government problem, though I think the federal government has abdicated its role in housing over the course of the last, frankly, 2 decades, as they've dramatically reduced social housing commitments, affordable housing commitments, et cetera. I also think that, frankly, the inflation issue, just inflation, as you correctly point out, number one, was an international global problem caused by the pandemic, and has been, to a large extent, solved. Inflation, in the most recent report, is down below 3%. And if you take out housing costs, it's at 0.5%. And so inflation has been, in almost every manner, solved, and solved not only in Canada but around the world. And because of that, interest rates are being solved, and interest rates in the short term are not down to where we want them to be, but the long end of the curve is very reasonable today, and almost every economist thinks it's going to be coming down over the future. So inflation and interest rates seems to have been solved, and so the whole criticism of just inflation seems to, I think, be an issue of the past, not an issue of the present. I've done a mini thesis for my doctorate on carbon taxes. I'm a firm believer that carbon taxes actually are the best way to fight climate change, and I think most economists think it may be a tax that people dislike, but it's a smart tax. Brian Mulroney said that every single leader post him loved the fact that he was the guy that put the GST in place, and so people hated the GST, but every single other politician that came after him realized that it was the best possible thing for our economy, and said to me that he thought a carbon tax would be the same thing. The person who put it in place would be hated, but every single person after would say it was the smartest fiscal attitude. I really worry, you said you don't have an argument with Pierre Poilievre. I really worry that a lot of his policies are policies of the past, and are slogans, as many people have criticized, and really, as you say, speak to separation and partisanship and division, to Western alienation, to rural alienation, to to the trucker convoy and people that were anti-vax. And I don't think that that is what brings our country together. That said, Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party don't seem to have been able to capitalize on that. And yet,
well, because
Justin Trudeau is thought of as
communicating.
being a great communicator. So what's gone wrong?
Well, first of all, I want to be very precise when I said I don't have any personal sort of animus towards Pierre Poilievre, but there's more than one issue that he would bring up that I would be passionately opposed to. And just an easy one is the CBC. The dismantling of the CBC is nuts. I mean, that is essential, especially for the fact that we've got so much of our country that's in a rural area, and it depends on the CBC. It's one of our great instruments of national unity. But let's not dwell on him for a second. The point you made about Justin Trudeau, I don't know why the place has been floundering, or it's almost like his engine room is not working with him. I don't, I was telling someone the other day, I dropped into an MP's office, no names here. It said it was open, but it wasn't open. I called, I couldn't get an answer. I called 5 times, no answer. I decided then, what the hell? I'm going to do a little test. I called 10 MP's offices. Nobody picked up the phone. Well, that's insane. Justin Trudeau can't do this alone. He's got to have his team working with the people of Canada. He's got to have those constituency office responsive to people. I mean, it's insane to me that you can't phone and somehow get a hold of a member of parliament, or if you go to their office and they say they're open but they're closed. It's nuts. So I think I don't know if this has been caused by the COVID situation, and this is the post-COVID that everybody stay at home and do whatever the hell they want. But the whole place needs an injection of let's get off our butts and let's get back to work. It's a funny thing. I'm not I don't, this Doug Ford, our premier, when he said the other day, people have to get off their butts if they're healthy and able-bodied. I think we need to get a whole bunch of people in the public service, members of parliament, their staffs. I think we need to get a whole reinvigoration going right now. And quite frankly, we're going to need it if we're going to take on the Bloc Quebecois.
We're chatting with Dennis Mills about his attitude toward what the next election is going to be fought on. And he thinks it's going to be fought on who speaks for the future of Canada. We're going to take a final break, and I'm going to come back with some concluding comments with Dennis Mills in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Really interesting conversation, and I think could be profound as to the agenda for the upcoming election. Stay with us, everybody.
Hey, Justin.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We're chatting with Dennis Mills, who thinks that the next election is going to be about who speaks for Canada. Dennis, if Justin either read your post or listened to this radio and he called you up and said, Dennis, what do I got to do? What do I got to say? What would you tell him?
I'd say, Justin, I'm sure you know this, but there's only one issue. And you've been handed this issue almost miraculously. And it's something that your dad had to deal with in 1980. And it's who speaks for Canada. Just get every other thought out of your mind. Put a team together of communicators right across the country. Make the only focus who speaks for Canada. And get out there and get into the House of Commons every day. Whenever that house is open, don't miss question period, even go in and participate in other days, but make sure not only you, but every single one of your members of parliament, all of them, all the team, and everyone else around you, they've only got one message: who speaks for Canada. And here are the problems if we end up with a divided country. So it's a positive campaign, it's an upbeat campaign, and it's going to force Canadians, ultimately, who decide what goes on, it's going to force them to take a stand. And I know you're only at 10 or 15% in the polls, but you have a duty to the country to tell people this is serious stuff. And if you don't choose me, to speak for Canada. You think that somebody else is stronger. I understand, but I'm going to go out with this issue seared in everybody's mind.
And if he tries that and loses it, and the prime ministership becomes Pierre Poilievre, and the Bloc Quebecois is the official opposition, what do you see happening to Canada?
Well, I just we then have to make sure and rally whoever the people of Canada choose to be their leader. The prime minister becomes Pierre Poilievre. You ask if that happens, then for the love of the country, we all have to do our part to keep the country together.
Dennis, when I read your post, it was very impactful because I think you're right. I think that people have been politicking in partisanship and division and separation at Canada's peril, and Quebec's separation and Western alienation and urban versus rural, right wing versus left wing. They all might help you from a partisanship standpoint and popularity standpoint and getting elected standpoint, but it's bad for Canada. And I agree with you. I think that this is an incredible opportunity. And I do think that Justin Trudeau actually, even with some of his weaknesses that we've talked about last week on my show and with other guests, is the best able to be the person that can speak for Canada. And so I'm going to reach out to him. I encourage you to reach out to him. And I think that you might be right. And you might have saved Canada and saved Justin Trudeau and saved the Liberal Party in your post. And I really appreciate you doing so, sir.
Well, you're very kind there, Brian. And I know we've only got a few seconds. Can we touch on a provincial issue?
Yes.
How many seconds have we got?
A minute.
I love Doug Ford's tunnel idea under the 401. Did you know that the best Canadians invented the best tunnel technology in the world? Did you know that, Brian?
I did not.
It's out there. It's out there in Etobicoke, and Doug Ford could put 100 of those tunnel technology machines all along the 401, and he could have that thing built in no time. So I think bravo to Doug for thinking so big and trying to take on the challenge of gridlock in a very, very almost like the way people said we're going to build a railway coast to coast 160 years ago. And I don't know, there's a plug for Doug Ford.
Well, we'll have to do another show on tunnels. I was part of a group that was at one point in time proposing a tunnel to replace the Gardiner Expressway, which I happen to think makes a lot more sense. And there's a whole history of extending the waterfront into Lake Ontario. We could build a tunnel. We could remove the Gardiner Expressway and turn Lakeshore Boulevard into a boulevard. And have you been in Boston recently? The sinking, the big dig that gets a lot of complaints and I think justified because of over budget and delays. But it's transformed Boston, and Boston downtown is a completely different place today and a more beautiful place because of that big dick and the tunneling of that. I think that the tunnel in Montreal is similarly beneficial. And I think that while a lot of people have criticized his idea, it is a big vision. And I think at times you need big visions, even if that specific vision doesn't get achieved. But let's do another show on that and chat about that. And also,
but in closing, Brian, it's who speaks for Canada?
Who speaks for Canada? Dennis Mills does. And we'll see who else does. Thank you, Dennis Mills, for joining us tonight. That's our show. I remind you, I'm on every night, Monday through Friday at 6 p.m. on 960 AM. You can stream online at www.saga960am.ca, even from Bala. And all my shows get posted to social media and YouTube, etc. Podcast servers as soon as the radio show goes to air. Dennis, what an honor to have a show talking about Canada and who speaks for Canada with you on the 5th year anniversary of my show. Really appreciate it, sir.
My privilege to be here with you, Brian. Thank you so much.
Good night, everybody.